Hey, loves. So, welcome to another episode of Self Love Your Way There. This particular episode I've been wanting to do for a while now and been kind of putting off because I really wanted to make sure I had the right words for this and that I was in the right energy space for this because this topic is a bit controversial. And as with many things in today's world, when we speak about things that are a bit controversial or pushing the envelope, we can get a lot of pushback for them. We can be a lot of those, what I call internet pirates, that are um, up under your comments, naysayers and attackers and all of that. And I just wanted to be ready for that. And I wanted to make sure that I held to the truth because this is my greatest job here in my life is to speak my truth. And this is truth. This is a truth for me. And today I want to speak to you about how conventional spirituality made me sick. Basically, it contributed to my manifestation of the diseases that I had. Now, we've talked about that I had a near-death experience, and that when I had the near-death experience, Source told me in the near-death experience that my key to healing myself was learning how to re-embody the wholeness of my soul, to come back home to my soul, to bring my soul back home into my body. And the way to do that was through self-love. But there were some other things that I was shown in this experience, and that mainly that my illness was manifested because I was imbalanced, and that I was going to have to come back into balance. And the path to balancing was to love myself, and that I was disconnected. I was disconnected from my soul. I was disconnected from the energy and the wholeness of the energy of my soul. And that my journey into healing was going to be a journey into bringing the wholeness of my soul back into myself, right? Bringing the balance of my soul back into myself. And as I began to learn about that, over the years that followed my near-death experience, it took me many years to really understand that and learn what all that means. And I had many mystical experiences. I had many channel downloads about it that helped my awareness about this. I came to this awareness around how what I was learning in spirituality was contributing to the imbalance that had caused my disease. So I want to share that today because I see this a lot, as a matter of fact, in many of us who are spiritual seekers, especially people who have been in the spiritual path for a long time. I see this same type of thing happening, the same type of phenomena where the teachings that we are receiving in spirituality are causing people to be highly imbalanced. And a lot of their illnesses that they're experiencing are coming from the imbalance. So before I jump into all of that, one thing I learned in my journey, not just with healing myself, but when my intuitive gifts opened up and I began to do a lot of medical intuition work with people and helping people heal and talking to their bodies and seeing what their bodies needed to heal, what I found was the main cause of illness, well, actually disease, chronic disease specifically, in the body is imbalance and disconnection. That is the main cause, that there is an imbalance that is happening with us, that we're not experiencing the wholeness of our soul. I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second. But we're not experiencing the wholeness of our soul. We're more on one side than the other side. And that we're disconnected. Like our body, our soul's energy is love. And it is it's a multi-vibrational energy, meaning it's not just one thing. It's made of several vibrations like freedom, joy, worthiness, peace, ease, things like that. Safety, joy, freedom, worthiness, all of that. So that's part of the vibe. Those all make up the wholeness of love. And when we're disconnected from any one of those vibrations, meaning when we're living an emotional state holding an emotional state for a chronic amount of time that is not in alignment with one of those vibrations, that disconnects us. It literally disconnects the energy of the soul from the body. Like the energy of love and the energy of fear or shame or suppression cannot exist in the same place at the same time. Only one can exist in a place at a time. So either love is there or it's not, right? And so in the body. So if we're holding thoughts of shame and fear and we're suppressing parts of ourselves, then we're disconnecting aspects of our soul from our body. This is literally what a lot of shamans and mystics and healers in ancient sacred sages would say, what they call soul disembodiment. Right? It's literally parts of the soul are not landing inside the body because they can't, that vibration and this vibration. So those two vibrations can't exist in the same space. So having said all of that, I want to share with you. So I want to lay that ground for understanding, how disease gets manifested in the body. The body cannot handle disconnection from the soul's energy for a long time. It can handle it, for a while, but it can't go years or months sometimes without the soul's energy being landed in the body consistently. And I had disconnected myself many ways from many aspects of my soul's energy. So that's why I was so near close to death. I wasn't just kind of sick. I was dead. So this is why, because I was very disconnected. And I was also very imbalanced. And so this is what I want to talk to you about. So what I discovered was when I crossed over to the other side and had my near-death experience, one thing Source told to me during the experience was that life wants to be very good to me. It wants to be very, very good to me, that it was created to be very good to me, that was the purpose of life. Life was, as a soul here on the planet, life is created to be good to us, to love us, basically. And that that we had to let it, that it wasn't just going to force love on us. We had to open ourselves and receive it. And this was the part that it took me a very long time to learn about, was how to let life be good to me, how to receive love from life. Because what I had been taught from childhood, when I was in my church systems and I was in religion, and then when I got into, out of my childhood home and I went to college and I started studying spirituality, because I was into spirituality very early, really around 16, and really dived into it as soon as I got to college. So I was studying metaphysics, I was studying New Age, psychic development. I was studying all of that, like as soon as I got to college at 18 years old. And so by the time I had my near-death experience, I had already been in the world of spirituality for about 5-6 years, very deep. And what I was learning through all of that from my religion and also from spirituality was not how to receive love, but how to give it. I was learning how to give love and not receive it. And this is the first key from the imbalance. And this is what I see from all of us. So many of us are so saturated in messages about giving, being of service, showing up for others. It's better to give than to receive. The giver gets into heaven. All of these messages we hear over and over and over and over again, even I'm not even talking about religion anymore, I'm talking about spirituality, about how if you really want to make money and be abundant, you give all your money away. You give. The best way to be spiritually enlightened is to be in service to other people. This is all in the messages that I was receiving. And what this made me do was be a person that completely was in service to others and was selfless and was never in service to myself. I was always considering other people's needs. I began to be a people pleaser. I began to be nice, meaning I would always kind of I wouldn't speak up for myself. I wouldn't rock the boat. I wouldn't set my own boundaries because that wasn't the nice and sweet thing to do. That's also a lot of messaging that we got in traditional spirituality. And it was about being nice and being giving. And while I'm talking about this is imbalance. So one thing I learned about the soul in my journey, especially with working with people doing mediumship work, when I was talking to souls around on the other side and also connecting with people's energies that were on this side, is that when the soul comes here, the soul splits. So it kind of, in the dimension that is the other side, we are in oneness. So we're in the wholeness, oneness aspect. So we're in the wholeness of the soul. So the soul is like, if you think about it as like as a coin and has like two sides to it. On one side of the soul is the giving aspect, is the giving, is the being of service, is to helping others, is to offering love to others in the world. That's one side of the coin. But on the other side of the coin is receiving love from others, receiving love from the world, getting your needs met, getting your desires and your dreams fulfilled, doing what nourishes and honors the self, speaking up for the self. Like that's the other side of that coin that is part of your whole soul. What traditional spirituality focuses on is only on one side. And so it strengthens it. And I'm going to speak about why that is, why I discovered that is as well, but it strengthens it. So what I was getting were messages over and over and over again that the way to be a good spiritual person, which is what I really want to be, the way to be enlightened and awakened and to actualize the fullness of the soul here, was to be in service to others, was to be thinking of others more than you thought about yourself, was to suppress your ego. This is a big message, was to suppress the ego, run away from the ego. The ego is a bad thing. It's not to be, here, is not to be used. It's not to be, it will mess your life up. And actually what they would say was they would fuck your life up if you were led by ego. And so it was all of this leading over into just messages about, suppress all of that and just go into being nice, being sweet, always being kind, don't be slow to anger, don't use anger, don't speak up from anger, don't be loud, it's the silence, stay in the silence a lot. So all of these messages, right? And what that made me do was, again, tip way over into the selfless side. Now, here's where it was really the big thing. What I discovered after my near-death experience was I'm an empath. And empaths are already innately wired to be selfless. The dominant, immediate thought of an empath is to help somebody else, is to be of service to somebody else more than the self. Right? That is already the innate thing. And here I was, this is already my innate energetic makeup in the world, right? So this is how I was, this is how I've been all of my life, right? Even before I got these messages, my innate kind of drive is, how can I show up for somebody? How can I serve them? How can I help them? How can I help the world? And then I'm getting these messages on top of that, which were even further, do not, and by the way, it's not just let me help the world, but I'm also helping myself. I'm only helping the world. I'm only helping other people. I'm only serving other people. I'm only helping other people heal. I'm not helping myself heal, right? And this was, I'm helping other people get happy. I'm helping other people meet their dreams. I'm helping them up, but I have all of these other dreams that I have that have not been fulfilled and I haven't been even working on, because I'm spending all my time helping other people, right? I'm probably sure some of you all, this sounds very familiar. I'm always saying yes to help other people, but nobody's helping me. And I have all these things that I need help with, and then they're just not getting done. But all these other people's things are getting done because I'm showing up to do them. That type of thing. And then the messages on top of that is telling me this is the good spiritual thing to do. This is what a spiritual person does. So now I even further have these thoughts that I must continue to do this, even though I'm drained, even though I'm exhausted, even though I'm unfulfilled because none of my dreams and none of my needs are getting met, even though I also probably have some resentment because when your needs aren't met, but you're helping showing up for other people's needs, you start to resent them. So all of this is happening and it's causing this energetic disconnection in me. One is causing this imbalance because I am serving others, but I'm never being served myself. That was the imbalance that was created. I am always serving others, but I am never being served. And not even if I am being served, it's rarely and not at a level that is nourishing or nurturing or healthy for me. I am in depletion. I am in depletion, in deprivation, but I'm of service. So I'm nice and I'm sweet, but I'm drained and I'm unhappy and I'm unfulfilled. And those energies disconnected me from the energies of my soul because my soul is joy. My soul is fulfillment. My soul is peace. It is not exhaustion. It is not drained. It is not unhappy. And so I moved through the world doing this. So on the outside, I kept a smile on and I looked really sweet. But on the inside, I was unhappy. I was unfulfilled and I was tired. And I carried that energy for a very long time, for years, until my body couldn't handle it anymore and it manifested disease. And that's, again, because why? Because I was being disconnected from my soul's energy, not because my body was trying to punish me or because it betrayed me in any way. The body cannot function well. It cannot function in health when it is being robbed or depleted or withdrawn from the energy of the soul. The energy of the soul is literally life force energy. It is the energy that gives the body life. So the teachings that I was getting were teachings that were literally making me rob myself of life force energy. I wasn't receiving life force energy. I was always giving it out. Now, giving is not a problem. It is the imbalance of giving. It is when you are living 75% of being in service and 25% of receiving. And I was less than that. I was probably like 90% of service and 10% of receiving. And most people that I know that I work with have a very problem with receiving because of all of these messages. They have a problem with speaking up for what we need, a problem for saying no to things that you don't want to do when you don't want to do them every time you don't want to do them. We have a problem with prioritizing our own needs. If you think about like mothers, right? They're always prioritizing their kids' needs and then they're drained at the end of the day and they're not happy and they don't feel fulfilled. But it's because you're always giving to the kids, but you're not receiving anything. And this is the thing that this message is everywhere in culture, but it is very dominant in spirituality. And I want to talk about why that is. So I talked to you a little bit about that in traditional spirituality, there's a lot of messaging, which I will be talking about a lot on this podcast, by the way, around the demonization and the suppression of the ego. And here's what I found, right? Here's what I found out in my healing journey, in my conversations in my channel conversation with Source, and in the conversations I had in mediumship when I was talking to souls on the other side, was this conversation that we're having from the ego has been really misguided. And why it's been misguided is because the ego, so I told you that the soul has two parts, right? When it comes into this dimension, when it comes into the physical dimension here, this earth plane, it kind of splits into two parts, right? So those two parts they're like two parts of a coin. So they're the wholeness of the soul, but they're both parts of the soul. One of those parts I call the higher self. You can call it the inner self if you want to. The higher or inner self. That's the part that we associate with like our inner being, with the part of and that's the part of the consciousness of the soul that is connected the most to the other side. So it has the viewpoint of the other side. And it has the viewpoint of giving love. giving love, giving love. The other part of that consciousness of the soul is the ego. Yes, the ego is actually a part of the consciousness of the soul. And it is the part of the soul that the soul creates that allows it to have an individual experience. Because the ego's perspective is one about individuality. It's about the individual self. And the higher self's perspective is really about the whole, all self, all of us connected, the we, right? So you have the ego and the higher self. The ego has been demonized as something that is bad, but it's not. The ego is the part of us that we actually need to have a human experience. We need it. And here's the other part that Source gave to me that really blew my mind and blew open my healing journey when I began to understand this, because this is where the balance began to come in. I was very high on the higher self aspect. I moved in the world through that perspective. I moved from that knowing. I was into the meditations, into the energy work, into the higher realms, all of that. That's all higher self stuff. But where I was really disconnected from was getting my needs met. And that is what our ego is for. That's where our ego helps us speak up for ourselves. Our ego helps us understand what our needs are and get them met. The ego is the part of us that understands where our boundaries need to be. And so here's the thing, when you have a very weak ego, what ends up happening, and you're very strong in the higher self, which this is empaths, especially, I'm speaking specifically to you, empaths and highly sensitive people, this is you specifically. When you're very high in the higher self stuff, you're into the nature, you're into being quiet, meditating, you're into the energy stuff. A lot of times you'll be very weak in the ego and you'll have very poor boundaries. When you're high in the higher self and low in the ego, you have very poor boundaries, so people walk all over you. You're always feeling disempowered and violated. You don't feel like you're being heard. Sometimes you don't feel like you're being seen. And you'll feel like when in these places, when you have a strong ego, you feel very disempowered. This is also why people that are empaths and highly spiritual people have hard time with money. They have a hard time having abundance with money, because the ego is the part of you that is the part of the soul's consciousness that is in control with understanding what the self needs and getting the self needs nourished and met. This side is when you have, again, when you're in the higher self and it's strong, your ego's not, you're going to be weak in that. And so what spirituality does is it goes way over here into the higher self. It only speaks about that. And here's why. And so what ends up happening is people in spirituality tend to have very weak egos and very, very strong higher self. So they feel one with everybody. They're very compassionate. They're very giving. They're very selfless, but they're very unfulfilled. They're unhappy. They're oftentimes very unhealthy, because again, they're unhealthy because they're imbalanced. And they're not embodying the fullness of the soul. The soul is both. It is both of these things. And so why this is happening is, one, look who was the dominant teacher, especially in the West, of spirituality. Who were the major teachers of spirituality? It was men. It was men. And who were the people that were coming to the crowd to watch? Like, who were the people that were sitting in the audience listening? Mostly women, gay men, and empaths and highly sensitive people. Who's not sitting in the audience of these, attending these retreats. And this, by the way, I did all this stuff, attending these retreats, going on shamanic journeys, attending these meditation stuffs, are people who are egotistical, who are too far on the ego and weak in the higher self. They're not doing any of that. They don't care about any of that. But those are the people that actually need to hear the message. The people that are in the audience are already strong in that. What they needed to hear more about was the women, the empaths and highly sensitives, and the gay men. They needed to hear about how to strengthen their ego so that they can speak up for themselves, they can hold boundaries, they can get their needs met, they can receive. So I talked to you about, okay, the higher self is about giving. The ego is the part of the soul that helps you receive. It helps you receive. It helps you receive love. It helps you be loved. The higher self part of the consciousness is the part that helps you be love. You're supposed to be both. You're supposed to have a balance of both. And what was happening in traditional spirituality was men who were heterosexual men, especially, by the way, who were already strong in their egos because we lived in a world that strengthened the egos of heterosexual men. They had already had strong egos. And so to balance themselves, what they had to learn was how to be in the higher self more. And so they thought that's what spirituality was. They thought that's all spirituality was. They thought spirituality was all about the higher self, because for a person who is strong in the ego and weak in the higher self, that is the balance path for them, right? So these men who are teaching these spirituality things about suppressing the ego, you get away from the ego, give and be of service to others and think about others more than you need others, you need yourself. That is the message that part of the consciousness needed to hear. The people that are strong in ego and very weak in higher self, they need to hear the messages to raise the higher self-awareness. But that's not who they were talking to. They were talking to people who were already higher in the higher self and very weak in the ego, and telling them to further suppress the ego. So their ego went way down and their higher self got way stronger, and they were very out of balance in their life. They were out of balance. And so their energy was out of balance. Their consciousness was out of balance. Their life was out of balance. They weren't receiving. They weren't getting their needs met. They weren't happy. They weren't fulfilled. They didn't have boundaries. They were being violated, and they didn't have strong relationships with money. They didn't have a physical life that was fulfilling, but they had a mental life that was fulfilling. And that was what was causing imbalance in traditional spirituality, and that nobody's really talking about. There's only one other person I've heard talk about this, and that's Anita Moorjani, bless her soul, because she is the only other person I've heard talk about this. But this is what I was shown as well, that the messages that we're receiving are out of balance, and that the messages that are coming from traditional spirituality, if you're an empath, and by the way, feminine energy is very aligned with empathic energy. So a lot of women have this same thing, even though you may be a woman and not be an empath, but you still are very close to it, because feminine energy has empathic abilities and capabilities. So, and women are being socialized as well into this very thing. So this is why women, gay men, and a lot of Black folks as well, by the way, are very high in the higher self attributes and very weak in the ego attributes. And this is why there's so much dysfunction and disease happening in these communities. It's because you're supposed to be loved and be loved. We're supposed to be loved and be loved. And what we're being focused on, and what the majority of the messages that are coming out there are about how to be love. And if you're an empath or a woman or a Black person, especially American Black person, or a gay man, that part is something that's already been very socialized into you. You're more stronger than that. Now, I'm not saying that you need to suppress that either, because suppression is not healthy either. So just like you can, if you're going to continue to strengthen your ability to be loved, you need to double strengthen your ability to be loved. And that's what I had to do to learn how to heal myself. My healing journey is about learning how to be loved, how to receive love more than it is to be loved in the world. Not saying that I'm suppressing being loved, I'm running away from it, that I'm going to do the opposite and say you shouldn't be loved. because that's not true either. Both of them are part of the soul. You're to be both, but you have to have a balance in order to be a well-being in this dimension. You have to be balanced. And the conversation on being selfless and the conversation on reaching into the higher self is out of balance. We also need to know the attributes of how to strengthen our egos, like how to be heard, how to be seen. This is also, again, why people in these communities are often not heard. This is why men, heterosexual men, are often in leadership positions. Why? Because they allow themselves to be heard and be seen. Because that comes from what? A strong ego. Why women and Black folks and gay men and empaths, especially empaths, God help you if you're a Black gay empath. That's why they have problems with getting their voices out there, getting their services out there, being seen, getting out there. Why you don't have a lot of empaths in politics? Because we're running over to the higher self stuff and we're staying away from this stuff that actually could affect our lives. And also because we're not allowing ourselves to be heard and be seen and setting boundaries. And this, again, this is what comes from strengthening your ego. The ego is not supposed to dominate the life. It's supposed to be imbalanced with the higher self so that you flow between the two. You flow between the two. This is why you have a left and a right brain. And I'll be talking about this probably in another episode too, the connection between the ego in the left brain and the higher self in the right brain. This is exactly why your anatomy is the way it is. Your soul created it for a reason. We have two parts, two eyes that split down the middle, two arms. There's a reason why we have this appearance of having two things. There are two parts to us that work in conjunction to make a whole. But we have been taught in our spiritual teachings that there's only one side that we need to focus on. And a lot of and think about how much of spiritual teaching is about leaving your humanity and just really focusing on your spirituality. You're supposed to be both. Your soul wanted to be both. It wouldn't have come here into this dimension if it didn't want to also experience the humanity of things. The humanity of you is controlled by the ego. Now, again, it's supposed to be balanced. So you go too far over into the ego and you have a weak, so you strengthen your ego, and you have a weak higher self, a weak, connection to that. What ends up happening is you become egotistical or you become narcissistic, right? That's when your ego is too far out of control. And again, what are the qualities of narcissistic, egotistical people? They're always speaking up. They're not listening to you. They're getting all the attention on them. They're bringing all the attention, right? So, but when they balance with the higher self, then you begin to see the narcissist or the egotistical person begins to see their connection to other people, because that's what the higher self is about, helping you see your connection and your oneness with everybody. Your compassion and your empathy is where your empathy for other people, you begin to be giving instead of always having everything be serviced about you. You also begin to give, right? But that's for the egotistical and narcissist persons. For this tribe over here, the women and the empaths and highly sensitives and Black folks and gay men, what needs to happen is, so you're over here always thinking of others, taking care of your family and your culture over yourself, being of service, never saying no, never resting, always showing up and giving, because your ego is weak. And so when you do this, also, you don't have boundaries, because again, the higher self is more concerned with the we. And so it's not really concerned about like what is the self needs. So your boundaries will be crossed and you'll feel upset and you'll be walked over a lot and you'll be taken advantage of a lot. And so you need to strengthen the ego so that you have strong boundaries and compassionate boundaries. This is, when you're in balance, your boundaries are compassionate. They're not walls. They're just boundaries that allow love to flow in this relationship. You speak up. You allow yourself to be heard. You get your message. Like, for a long time, I had so much to say. I was learning so much and I was getting so many downloads and I was having so many mystical experiences that were opening my eyes to a world that nobody was talking about, but I wasn't sharing it. I wasn't speaking up. I felt suppressed because of that. I wasn't allowing myself to be seen. I was hiding, right? That's another aspect. When you have a weak ego, you hide. I was hiding. I was doing all these things. And so the thing that made me sick was this imbalance. Like, I was hiding this part. My voice was suppressed. I wasn't speaking up. I wasn't saying what I wanted to say. I didn't have boundaries. I was always feeling violated and disempowered, and resentful because of that. I was feeling unfulfilled. I was feeling very deprived of my own needs because I was always showing up to meet my parents' needs, my family's needs, other people's needs, my friends' needs, lovers' needs. And I was never getting my needs met. I wasn't going for my dreams. My dreams were unfulfilled because I was always prioritizing other people out before prioritizing myself. That all required me to learn how to strengthen my ego. And this is the thing that I said this was going to be controversial, because this very conversation of strengthening the ego in many spiritual circles is viewed as wrong, and I'm teaching something wrong. And this is why I didn't say this for a long time, because I know they were going to come and attack, but this is exactly what I was shown, is the ego is the part of us that helps us receive love. It is not the higher self's job. The higher self is the part of the soul that is to be loved, to give it. The ego is the part that helps us receive. And most of us, especially those that are under the traditional spirituality umbrella, are starved of love because you do not know how to receive it, because we're not being taught that. And that's why I started my work. That's also why Source told me to learn self-love, because self-love is the practice of receiving. That is what loving ourselves is about. It is about receiving love, giving ourselves our own love, making sure we receive love from ourselves, from life, from our life, that we get our needs met, that we hold our boundaries. These are aspects of loving ourselves. Holding our boundaries, honoring our boundaries, speaking up for ourselves, letting ourselves be seen, showing up. And that's things that are really in control of that the ego is control of. And so if you have a very weak ego, you're going to have a very hard time loving yourself. When people come to me and they say, I have a very hard time loving myself, I don't know where that's from, one of my first things I say to them, which blows their mind, is say, because your ego is very weak. And it's not your fault. We're taught and conditioned into having weak egos. And this is why we don't love ourselves, why we don't shower ourselves with appreciation and acceptance, why we don't get our needs met, make sure we get our needs met, why we don't make sure we live a life of joy and fun, why we don't make sure that we're speaking our boundaries and making sure our boundaries are honored, why we're not saying no. Like, all these things that help us receive and feel the energies and vibrations of love require us to have a stronger ego. And we're just not being taught that. And that was one of the things that I came to an awareness of in my spiritual journey, in my healing journey after my near-death experience, when I was looking at, okay, what were the things that were the root cause of my illness that I need to address so that I can become healthy? And this was one of the main things, was I have to strengthen my ego. I have to strengthen my ego so that I can be in balance, because my higher self was very strong. I meditated, I would spend a lot of time in nature, I was very kind. I knew the oneness, I could see the oneness, I could see energy. And so this is all the stuff that happens when you're strong in the higher self. You could see energies, I could feel energies, I could see auras, I could speak to people on the other side, I saw the other dimension, all of that good stuff. I was all in the higher realms, but I wasn't in this earthly plane. And in order to be in the earthly plane, I got to be in my ego. And so that was it. So that's what I wanted to share with you all for part one. This is part one of this conversation. I'm going to come back in the next episode and continue with part two, because I have more to say about this. We're going to talk about the right side of the body, well, that's both sides of the bodies and what they have to do with the ego and the higher self and how our body communicates to us where we're imbalanced. I'm going to talk to you about some other aspects of the ego that the ego is in control of that we need to strengthen, and some more things about the higher self, like when we're too far in the higher self and too weak in the ego, what are some of the challenges that we face? There's some more of that I want to share, but I just wanted to share this with you. Yeah, traditional spirituality, the messages conditioned me into being imbalanced, and that imbalance manifested disease for me. And healing myself was to learn how to be more balanced by strengthening my ego. And that is in alone a controversial conversation in many circles. So I hope this has shed some light. I'm going to shed some more light on it, but I just wanted to start a spotlight to shed on this conversation because not many people are having it. And it's time for it to be had, because I think this new wave that we're entering into in humanity, this new evolution, we're going to be balanced, especially for people that fit in the other tribes. There's not a one thing fits all type of thing. That's not what this world is actually about. And so we've been giving this blanket thing of spirituality about selflessness is the way for all beings, and it's not. If you're an empath or you're in those other tribes, in order to become a whole being, to express your wholeness and to express the balance of, because balance is part of wholeness, you're going to have to learn how to be more self-full, meaning getting full of your own energy, the energy of your soul, what fills you up with the energy of your soul instead of what gives you the energy of your soul out. And that is really what I think this new wave of spirituality is going to be about. More people are going to start talking about how to become self-full instead of being so selfless, so that we can return to balance and we can experience more healthy lives because of it. Until next time, I love you. Now go love yourself. Bye.